I'd like to talk tonight about the social relevance of medical museums and, in particular, whether they could draw on science and art collaborations to engage a wider audience in thoughtful reflection about illness, disability, caregiving, and death. As Sabina mentioned, public interest in anatomical collections predates the recent phenomenon of the Body World's touring exhibitions of plastinated, dissected corpses created by Gunther von Hagens and his imitators, like the example shown on the right here. And in fact, alongside the private collections of human specimens gathered for the education of medical professionals since the 16th century, there's also existed a public culture of anatomical display. Despite the differences in purpose and in audience, both private and popular anatomical exhibitions featured specimens loaded with meanings beyond the strictly scientific. So we see in this depiction of a 19th century anatomical exhibition, alongside the specimens intended to demonstrate human anatomy, other curiosities such as tattooed skin on the right-hand side, a sword-swallowing man, the vitrine on the left, and conjoined twins in the vitrine on the far left over there. And in the center, surrounded by male observers, the presentation of a wax woman with flowing hair reclining on red velvet, exposed in her nakedness, and beneath it as her internal organs are removed for exhibition. Now, such Venuses in wax, as they have come to be known, can be found in the illustrious collections of medical museums today, exhibited in much the same way as they have always been, like this one, which is on display in Bologna, Italy. The photograph, which perfectly captures the salacious appeal of this kind of artifact, was photographed by Joanna Ebenstein, the creator of the rich website on anatomical collections, Morbid Anatomy, that I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, where she explores these kinds of objects in detail. As she notes on the website, the museum describes this waxwork as the agony of a young woman represented in her last instant of life as she abandons herself to death voluptuously and completely. The thorax and abdomen can be opened, allowing the various parts to be disassembled so as to simulate the act of anatomic dissection. Now, much of the appeal of such of these objects lies in the art behind their creation, as well as the thrill of seeing forbidden flesh and looking beneath it. That was wax. Human remains have also been artistically prepared, full of symbolism and artful display, as well as exhibiting the craft of dissection and preservation themselves. And this selection of items from the Boer Harbor Museum that we're here today illustrates the beauty in these collections. So clearly, anatomical exhibitions have always drawn on curiosity, voyeurism, playfulness, and art, as well as science, in both the collection and exhibition of these objects. Behind the closed doors of the old medical museum, this went unacknowledged, but as museums open up to a wider audience, the question of why these objects are on display and whether the public will respond to them in an appropriate manner has become a perennial concern for museum stakeholders. Indeed, medical museums display a wide variety of approaches towards their material, and curators disagree over the best strategies for engaging with visitors. In the 1990s, in the United States, as medical collections came under attack for perpetuating past injustices by exhibiting human remains without the permission of subjects, and for recreating the culture of the freak show, several high-profile institutions were reorganized to move away from the culture of the macabre and to focus instead on health education and the breakthroughs of modern medicine. The National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. modernized their displays and removed many of the pathological specimens to reflect this changing sensibility. The director in charge of this re-presentation of collections was then appointed to the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia in 1995 to repeat the process of cleaning up that he had undertaken in D.C. But such reforms divided museum staff as well as the general public, with many bemoaning the loss of some of the most fascinating elements of traditional exhibits. Now, in recent years, in recognition of the enduring popularity of the more spectacular specimens from their collections, and needing to offset the high costs of maintaining them by attracting large numbers of visitors, these same museums have given up on these projects to scrub the collections of curiosities and have embraced their popular and sometimes prurient appeal, but to very different degrees. So the Mutter Museum allows Gothic weddings in front of their skull cabinet, as you see on the left-hand side, as well as the first ever night at the museum planned to occur this November, when members of the public can stay overnight amongst the exhibits and enjoy a drink, food, and ghost stories with one another. Now, the Mutter Museum gets away with such activities in part because its display style harks back to the 19th century, and as such, it can be seen as a museum of a museum. This strategy of contextualizing historic collections by redisplaying them in traditional ways can also be seen here in the Netherlands in the newly renovated Museum Vrolijk, and this is an image from that collection in Amsterdam. But while displaying cramming glass cabinets with bottles of body parts offers an implicit reference to the context in which these collections were collected and exhibited, it leaves little room for a more detailed investigation of the role of medical collections, the role of medical collections in categorizing human beings in hierarchies of race and sex, their role in defining normal and abnormal, and their role in tying different and unusual anatomies to disease. These practices of the past may in fact be reinscribed wherever medical museums do not more explicitly address the role of collecting, categorizing, and exhibiting human beings in shaping social values as well as medical knowledge. In fact, popular reactions to the display of human remains and wax anatomies as medical curiosities sometimes follows exactly the form feared by many museum stakeholders who are juggling with this question about opening up these collections to a wider audience. The reactions to the Museum Vrolijk that I show here, culled from a few tourist websites, give a flavor of the kinds of comments found all over the web and related to medical collections all over the world. So I want to be clear, I'm not singling out any one institution here. A search for medical museum or freaks results in the same kinds of comments, bringing up numerous blogs, Flickr accounts, and even a Pinterest board from the Boer Harbor, among many other collections. So can it be that the Medical Museum has been so effective at creating a scientific distance between visitors and the objects and curiosities on display that some people fail to even recognize the fellow humans surrounding them in bottles and cabinets? For those who claim an educational function for medical museums, what exactly are we teaching then in such encounters? And most importantly, for us to consider this evening, how can we harness the appeal of these objects for more productive ends? This is where art offers a way to rehabilitate the medical museum for modern audiences, a way to harness curiosity in the weird and the gory for a more meaningful result than entertainment or health education. And I'm going to turn to a particular case study now and the issue of babies' bodies on display in an American context, where, of course, it's particularly provocative because of the ongoing culture war over abortion in the US. In 2004, I attended a panel discussion at the National Museum of Health and Medicine on the topic of art and disability. After a presentation by medical historian and ethicist Alice Drager about the difference between the ways the medical profession represent people with unusual anatomies versus the way that those people and their friends and families see them, another panelist broke down in tears on the stage. After seeing pictures of conjoined twins Abigail and Brittany Hensel, Deborah Constantine, a visual artist who was meant to be talking about a completely different topic, then spoke about her experience of giving birth to conjoined twins who had died in the womb. She described the shock at the discovery that she'd been carrying conjoined twins, the attempts to shield her from any interaction with the twins, not even to see or to have an explanation of what condition they were experiencing, and the long-term impact of this experience on her life for the 30 years since this event. The room was silent and shocked by the whole experience, and I can report that the atmosphere was very electric. People were really moved but quite on edge by the interaction and this very human moment of somebody revealing such a personal story in such a public forum. Now, Draeger, who had previously conducted research in medical records and journals for clients who were searching for information about themselves that had previously been withheld by medical professionals, particularly for people diagnosed as intersex, was able to locate a description of a similar case to help complete some of the details that remained confusing for Deborah Constantine, giving the artist a better sense of why her twins had been described in the autopsy report that she had to fight to see as one baby, and showing how they might have looked. She used the information that Draeger found to create a sculpture. The work in progress on the left, titled Products of Conception, was based on this research, showing how one head was contained within the other, with two bodies beneath that. As Constantine had never been allowed to see them, and had had to fight to read the autopsy report at all, she was particularly concerned to be able to picture her babies and to understand. The artist referred to the final version of this sculpture as My Boys, and said that when creating the artwork with clay, she felt like she was holding them for the first time. She later created a range of art on the theme of conjoined twins and participated in a panel with Draeger about medical ethics. The artwork was bought by Draeger's University to contextualize the collection of babies in bottles contained in its own medical museum. Now, perhaps this seems like an unusual case, but the plight of both the mother and her babies in this story resonates with many visitors who come to medical museums to address their own experiences. The director of the National Museum of Health and Medicine, for example, has noted that people come to the museum repeatedly to visit these twins. And when the museum was undergoing renovation, visitors often asked where they were and when they would be back on display. She suggested that women who had miscarriages were particularly drawn to this exhibit. So, a lively dialogue has emerged in the wider museum field about the role of museums in a healthy society, and focusing on issues particularly of social inclusion, but also about the representation of disease, disability, and how they might contribute to discrimination and exclusion in a society. I believe, though, that the majority of the debate about health and the museum has really focused on the health benefits that art museums might offer, particularly in work with dementia, access for disabilities, or addressing mental health issues. And there's lots of examples, particularly where mental health topics have come out in museum exhibits. This work has really not come anywhere close to the way these narratives are presented in the medical museum, or to say it more concretely, the medical museums, I think, have not participated in this approach to the lessons that their collections could have, or the relevance that their collections could have. So what more relevance could medical museums have if they engaged with this kind of material? If they took the material in their collections and instead of thinking about the scientific lessons, these social ones that might then read back into the production of medical knowledge and social hierarchies. While medical museums do engage artists to reflect on collections, and there's some nice examples going on in the Netherlands at the moment, but I'm sure you're all familiar with examples from lots of other cases too. This work like this, Abnormal Scientific Model of Disability at the Hunterian Museum in 2012, the artist looking at a memory jar collection, so taking that concept of bodies in bottles, and contextualizing the people that the body parts came from as one kind of intervention. These kinds of projects tend to be fleeting. They're temporary, they're add-ons to the museum activities, and they're not then integrated into understanding the collection more completely. So to conclude, I think it's really important that we reconsider the outcomes that we expect for medical museums. Do we intend to communicate facts, or to show how knowledge is produced? How can we make these places relevant to broad audiences with little interest in a career in medicine, health, or science? We need to remember that medical topics, like other scientific issues, have a wide impact for everyday life. You don't need to be considering a career to be interested in these topics, and these things can easily be related to your own experience and those of people in your family. Furthermore, how we present these histories can have a significant impact on empathy for others and on our own experience of illness. We need to think beyond a particular educational message or aesthetic appeal and consider the wider social implications of our exhibition strategies and the role that art and science can play in increasing relevance and resonance of medical museums in the lives of visitors. And with that, I'd just like to thank everybody involved in the Lawrence workshop, as well as these sources for some of the information I presented here today. Thank you.